By the 1760s, Boston had become one of the most important cities in British North America. It was a crowded port shaped by trade, power, and rising tension. Within a single generation, this city would be driven through revolution, scarred by conflict, and rebuilt as the heart of a new nation. In this video, I'm using modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, maps, and engravings to life. We'll be shifting perspectives, changing camera angles, and moving through these scenes in ways the original artists never could. The goal isn't just to look at the past, but to step into it. We'll move through Boston as it once was, imagining what it felt like to stand here from the first settlement to the Revolution. And if you stick around until the end, we'll compare these same locations to how they look today to see what time has changed and what still remains. Before we set foot in old Boston, it helps to look at how this story began. This painting depicts the arrival of the Winthrop fleet in 1630. Led by John Winthrop, these ships carried settlers to the Massachusetts Bay, laying the groundwork for what would soon become Boston. Imagine arriving on this unfamiliar stretch of coastline, stepping ashore without knowing what lay ahead, only knowing that everything you hoped to build would begin right here. Before we move into the 18th century, let's pause for a moment. This image shows Boston's first meeting house, originally built in 1632, only a few years after the settlement was founded. The building was simple, functional, and central to everyday life. It stood near today's State Street, in the heart of modern downtown, marking how closely the city's earliest foundations still align with its present layout. At this stage, Boston was still quiet, uncertain, and only beginning to take shape. This was a time when Boston was less a city and more an experiment. Modest wooden buildings lined muddy roads with ships anchored close to shore. If I could visit this place today, I'd see it as the earliest roots of the American dream. By the early 1720s, the harbor was already crowded with ships that powered the Atlantic economy. Look at Long Wharf. By 1743, it served as Boston's primary gateway to the world. From this point, ships arriving from Europe and the Caribbean unloaded cargo and passengers. It was a defining landmark whose outline can still be traced today. Rising behind it are church steeples marking the neighborhoods, including Christ Church in the North End, which we now know as the Old North Church. For those arriving by sea, the first sign of land was often Boston Light. Completed in 1716, it was the first lighthouse built in what would become the United States. Imagine finally seeing this light after weeks at sea, a signal that the journey was ending and opportunity was within reach. Now, let's step onto land just across the river in Cambridge. At this time, Harvard College was a small but vital center of learning. Long before it became a global university, it existed to train leaders for the colony. Massachusetts Hall, completed in 1720, is still standing today, the oldest surviving building at Harvard. It's strange to think how ordinary this place must have felt at the time, unaware of the future it would hold. Back in the town center, the old State House stood as the seat of colonial government. This was where laws were debated and royal authority was enforced. Today, it still stands in the heart of the city, a rare survivor, quietly witnessing the modern world growing around it. Nearby, Boston Common was a shared ground for grazing animals and public gatherings. But in the late 1760s, it was also where British soldiers conducted their drills, a constant reminder of imperial presence. Ordinary life and growing tension existed side by side. People crossed the common, kids ran around, and soldiers drilled, all without knowing that within a decade, this would become part of an independent country. We cannot be in Boston on the edge of revolution without stopping here. December 1773. Colonists boarded ships in the harbor and dumped chests of tea into the water. It wasn't called the Tea Party then. It was a deliberate act of resistance that pushed Boston one step closer to open war. In the shadows, the Green Dragon Tavern served as the informal headquarters for revolution. This was where Paul Revere and the Sons of Liberty gathered to debate and coordinate. In spaces like this, the revolution didn't begin with speeches, but with whispers shaped by anger and uncertainty. By 1775, Faneuil Hall had become the cradle of liberty. It was here that Bostonians gathered to argue over representation. It was a pressure point where public opinion turned into action, and the idea of resistance moved from private conversations into the streets. The war would eventually end, and by 1789, the streets were dressed for celebration. A triumphal arch was erected to welcome George Washington as the president of a new nation. For the people standing there, this was proof that the revolution had led somewhere. They were no longer part of an empire. They were part of something entirely new. Finally, we look at the Old North Church. Decades before the Revolution, it was just a quiet neighborhood landmark. But from this tower came a simple signal: 2 lanterns, warning that British troops were moving by sea. What had once been a place of routine worship suddenly became a central piece of the American story. Now, let's look at the present. Let's see how these landmarks have survived the passage of 3 centuries. The first meeting house is gone, but State Street remains a hub of power. The harbor has been filled and transformed, but it remains the city's heart. The old State House is now surrounded by modern towers, a brick witness to a changing world. And the Old North Church still rises above the North End, watching over the same streets where history first unfolded. Thank you for watching. Your ideas and feedback help shape these journeys. Let me know in the comments which city we should bring to life next. Until next time.